Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode on Continental Soccer TV. Today I have a really good guest, very intriguing guest, very unique guest, definitely outside of our norm, and his name is Markus Fjørtoft.
Thanks for the entire name there. Thanks. Shout out to my mom's maiden.
Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much.
I hope I pronounced it well, because Scandinavian names, they're very. I always find them very unique. Very unique, very interesting.
No, listen, I think you did very well, and you're the first one to introduce me with my mother's maiden name, which after all is part of my name. So I appreciate that inclusion.
Absolutely, man, 100%. I won't tell you my middle name because I don't want to embarrass people. You know what I mean?
We'll see at the end of this chat. Maybe you will.
Yeah, that's it, man. I put it on there. People on LinkedIn will be making fun of me till the cows come home. So we'll kind of just leave that one out of it. But no, like I say, it's great. It's great to have you on another episode of Continental Soccer TV, where we kind of speak about just many different things, Markus. And I know we have been speaking, and obviously just kind of going back, obviously, before we get into the main subject, and we just I just want our viewers to get to know you a little bit more, and just kind of imagine we're growing up, and we're going to school, and who is Markus? If we're in high school together, who's Markus? Tell us who he is.
That's a good question. There are many angles to that, but I guess I can take the ordinary one. But basically, I see myself as an explorer, and football is a means by which I can explore and be adventurous. I have a certain way I want to live as of right now, and I've been given the means to do so. So because of my upbringing, obviously my father had a very good football career. And as such, I was born in England and lived there for my first 5 years, born in Swindon, of all places. So I've spent a lot of my years at an international school, with a few exceptions of a few sports schools, Norwegian sports schools. And so, when you have that foundation and that exposure to a lot of different countries and cultures, and having gone to the international school and all that entails, I was always interested in seeking stimulation abroad, so to speak. And so when I was 20, I went to American college. I got a scholarship at Duke University, which for me, it's obviously a very good school, and I was looking for one that was a good balance between the academics and the athletics, and I knew it was a very good school. But then when I got there, it's all the more proven how good it was, because I didn't come there with any bias. I got to experience it all for myself, and I had the most incredible 4 years. I made some lifelong friends, met my girlfriend that I'm still with, and I had a goal when I went there to I thought, okay, let me set myself a lofty goal. I want to get drafted in MLS. Got drafted after my last season by the Seattle Sounders, and as football is, it's a tough business, as you know. I didn't get drafted for different reasons, and so I finished my master's degree, because I got my bachelor's and my master's degree from Duke, and then I thought, you know what, I've earned myself the freedom to pursue my dream for a bit, which was to play professionally, and so. Much back and forth. I went to New Zealand in September and played there. Met some incredible people again. Got to call a place that I just merely deemed the little island next to Australia. No offense to any Kiwi listeners, but that's all I knew. And I was able to call it home. And it was an incredible, a beautiful country. And then I thought, okay, you know what? I want to give myself another opportunity. Was able to get a trial with Hamilton Academical in the Scottish Premiership. 3-week trial, got offered a contract, joined them the following season, played there, and for one season, came back, and then I eventually went to Greenock Morton, which is in the Scottish Championship, and that's part of my journey. And as I say, being able to have those 2 degrees now, I think I have all the more freedom to pursue a football career, and I'm aware of my privilege when it comes to that, because for footballers, it's tough. You have to make certain decisions when you're 16, 17. I deemed it necessary for me. I said I wanted an education, but I also want to pursue football. What better place to do that than America? And that gave me the foundation by which now I can, explore and play football professionally. And let's see how long that lasts. But for now, I'm very happy as to where I'm at in my journey.
Right, and so if we kind of go through that, so obviously your parents, they're both from Norway, so that's kind of where your family originally from, and so in terms of looking at kind of your upbringing, so obviously your dad, was he a big influence? Was he a big role model to you growing up?
Yeah, my dad's my parents are my biggest role models. My parents have given me everything, and my dad, obviously, because of him, I got into football, as you do when you're a young little boy, and you see your father as a professional footballer. And while my mother has been there as a great guidance as well, like two of my best friends too. So I owe them so much for the opportunities they've afforded me. On the topic of football, I've never felt pressured to play. It's all been because of my love for the game. My dad's never pushed me, said you don't have to do this or do that. My discipline and my acknowledgement of what there needs to be in order to be good has come by itself pretty much. But of course, if you have a father as a footballer, you're also exposed to what the industry entails, what it requires to be a footballer, and you become rather observant of that, whether it is when he plays or when he was sporting director, or when so you know the industry a bit better, and you know what it takes. Nothing really surprises you now, and obviously he's now a great person for me to talk to because he's been through it all too. Whether you play in the Premier League or Scottish Championship or whatever, footballers still have the same problems. It's just on a different scale. But it's all this, manager selection. You're not playing, you are playing. I'm playing well, I'm playing poorly. Those are all the same. And to have him as a guidance and as a reference point obviously helps me a lot.
And so in terms of, kind of growing up, so we kind of just go back. So you were born in Swindon. And so Swindon gets a lot of flack in the part of the UK that it is, as you probably know. So from there, so kind of just take us through that path. So how long were you in Swindon? And I know you mentioned then you went to Germany. Kind of take us on kind of that path of your early life and to where you are today.
I mean, my dad, he talks about loyalty, but he played for 12 clubs during his career, 11 clubs. So, he moved around a bit. And I think that tested my mom for a bit because, he went to Swindon, had a rough patch there, and then he started scoring goals for fun. Was born in Swindon, and then, a year later, moved to Middlesbrough and played in Middlesbrough, and then he moved to Sheffield, and then he said, okay, this is where we're going to settle down. Like, this is where I want to spend the rest of the career. Like, we'll have a house here. And then, a few months or whatever, a year later, you're on loan at Barnsley, and then you're going to Eintracht Frankfurt in the Bundesliga. So, as a kid, you're not really phased by it. You're too young to really acknowledge it. But of course, for my mother and father, to travel around as they did, that's the life of a footballer. And thank God for having loving and fantastic people around. And so I went from England to Germany, and I played for Eintracht Frankfurt. Was my first proper club that I played for. I remember scoring a goal in my first game for the club, or for the team of players that were 1 year older, and I think that was the only goal I had. But it was all new to me. I was exposed to the strictest German coach, the most stereotypical German coach you could have, and we were 6 years old. And we were being fined if we came late for training and stuff like that. And my mother and father are a bit different when it comes to time setting, but we came late for training, me and my mother, and we were being fined. And then on another occasion, we played a game, and we had won. I don't know if I've even played, and I don't remember the incident all too well, but we'd won, and for an hour, the head coach gave us like a bollocking because we hadn't played well enough. We were 6 years old, so that was kind of the exposure to that German football mentality, and so yeah, I went to live there for 2 years, and then I came to Norway, where I lived for 13 years until I left for America.
Right. And so when you kind of take all those experiences, was it to you as a kid, did you really enjoy the adventure from Swindon to them being then up until you went back to Norway?
I think it's something that you look back in retrospect and see kind of how subconsciously it has affected you. Having gone to international schools in Germany and Norway, it's all you know, so you can't really compare with anything. It's that's the life. I grew up speaking Norwegian and English, and so that's what I knew, and the people that I was around, and in terms of talking English on a regular basis, but also being around with people from all corners of the world at these schools, it was something that now I can, in retrospect, say, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense why I might want to seek those opportunities elsewhere. Why I perhaps, despite the flag, and I'm extremely proud of Norway, why I don't necessarily, have lived there for the last, 7 years. And that's because, I before I see myself returning, but until then I have this extreme desire to explore the world. And football has so far been a means by which I can explore it.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's an incredible journey, man. And then my next one is when you were in Germany in the Bundesliga, sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. Ich verstehe viel, aber ich kann nicht so gut sprechen.
So you can give us the translation. I only know a few words, and I know a few words in German. My sister is a fluent German speaker, and so is my mum, funnily enough.
Okay. But don't show them this clip to them, though, because my pronunciations are terrible.
Okay, I'll have to get you scored on that. I'll say to my sister, I'll just say, what's his German like? Give me a score out of 1 to 10,
Yeah, let me know. It's very basic.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So anyway, so obviously we just fast track, and you're obviously moving back to Norway. And so this is literally outside of maybe visiting Norway. So what age are you at this point by the time you move back at 13 years of age?
No, it's 7 actually, because I have 5 years in England and then 2.5 in Germany, and then my dad goes to end his career at a Norwegian club when he's 34, 35. So we go back there, and I think having lived 12 years abroad, then I think was there was after a while all roads lead back home in a sense, and so I think that was a natural move for them then, and then had a fantastic life in Norway, and with a bit more stability, if you may, in the sense that you've had a house that we lived in and still live in now.
Okay. So in terms, and what part of Norway is that? Which part of Norway is that?
Right outside Oslo.
Right outside Oslo. That's actually quite interesting, because I obviously have met quite a lot of Norwegian people over the years, even players and things like that, but also people that are non-players. And I remember from looking at countries outside the EU, I've always looked at Norway, and they're a country that has obviously been quite successful. So they're kind of a country we're trying to emulate in the UK right now, I'm sure, because we're no longer in the EU. So kind of give us kind of your journey being back in Norway, and then kind of to obviously in terms of just the kind of the political landscape, because I know we've kind of spoken a little bit about that, and in terms of, and then up until going to the United States. I think it'll be good because there's two good contrasts there, I think, Markus.
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk through that lens of comparison, because I've had a very privileged upbringing, and like I've said, I've been in these international schools, and for me, I've it was uncomplicated in the sense that I was friends with people from all over the world, right? And so for me, issues of race and culture and as such, as much diversity as there was, it didn't really affect me because we were kids. Like, we didn't think in those lanes, and so that was never an issue for me being part of these schools. And then you can say, well, I'm white, right? So for me to be exposed to these issues, I'm not necessarily as, it's not necessarily as prevalent for me because simply of my ethnicity. And so I say that because in Norway, I never stumble upon those issues, and nor was the debate in Norway as such in which there was a platform where those issues could be explored. And I then bridge into America, because when I go then to Duke, my perspective on it widens, because Duke is a liberal school, and then there were a few incidents there, and so in that sense my perspective widened, because then I'm all of a sudden like, wow, racism, like, a bit naively, but I'm like, I thought racism used to be, or it wasn't that bad or whatnot, and then I see, wow, racism actually is is a deeper seated issue in America. And obviously America has it's very deeply ingrained in the country because of obvious happenings. But then I'm seeing, okay, wow, this, and then on the topic of free speech and what can be censored and all that, and all these issues then come into the foray for me, and issues that I wasn't really used to in Norway. And so that became a pretty prevalent contrast, coupled with the fact that you're taking classes that are related to that. My major was cultural anthropology, which has to do with cultures on a very general basis and a very general description. And so in that sense, you are asked to confront yourself with questions and issues in society that you weren't really used to. And I acknowledge that it's because of my upbringing, but also because of how Norway is as a country, more homogenous, and with that, there is obviously less diversity and less, if there were to be cases, they would be less discussed simply because of they're more so in the minority. And so that was that was, when I look back, a pretty stark contrast for me to see. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting now that with the Black Lives Matter protests in America, and obviously they were able to spread, and in the UK there were protests, and everywhere in Norway there was a Black Lives Matter protest. Right. Those discussions then were finally being had in Norway, and something that we haven't really had as much. And I sensed that the way the debate had gone, it was a lot more in its infant stages than it was in America. And I could see the way the discussions were being had. They were a lot more of a premature stage, but they were actually being discussed in the mainstream media. And then when I came back, over lockdown, and I have friends of a multi-ethnic background, then I'm like asking them, how was this for you? Have you had these exposures? Have you had, have you been at the hands of police discrimination, blah, blah? And then they say, yeah, like, actually more than you think. And then you're having these discussions that would never even come to mind before, because, I just simply wasn't, I simply wasn't acknowledging that the fact it was an issue to begin with. And so I think that's important to have those discussions. And so for me, a long story, but that's for me been those contrasts in terms of how the journey for me to explore them, but also then again back to me in terms of confronting those issues within the country and discussing those issues with friends too.
And so can I just actually ask you, because I know with Norway, and I know kind of what you were saying, kind of the two different contrasts, Markus. So if we kind of look at, I've followed things in Norway sporadically from time, because I keep up kind of the world news. And one of the things that I did notice, I remember when the whole Anders Breivik thing came out, which I think was a very highly publicized around the world, and what he did. I remember reading the newspaper, and I was like, oh my goodness. I can't believe this sort of thing is happening. And one of the things I said to my mum, actually, I was speaking to her about, I said, this sort of thing happens in America. It don't happen in Europe. You know what I mean? And so, and I just thought, no matter what your view is, you know what I mean? If you've got, and obviously Anders Breivik, I know there's a lot of theories about him, about the fact that he was just a far right Nazi, to be honest. That's kind of what, in my opinion, when I looked at what it was. But then I watched the movie, which was done, which I think is on Netflix. I think people can watch it there. I seen it about a year and a half ago, something like that. And I remember looking at it and the way that he was trying to paint Norway in his narrative of that they've done all these things wrong. And I mean, how accurate and do you think the reputation that he was trying to paint? Because one of the things I remember from in that movie, what I seen, because I know sometimes there's a lot of Hollywood nonsense put in movies, isn't there? So literally, but at the same time, when I looked at him, I just thought, my goodness, this is a guy that feels like he's been let down by the system. He feels, you know what I mean, like the fact that you can be let down by this, it doesn't mean you need to go murder people, you know what I mean, to accomplish.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's other ways of going about it, you know what I mean, than doing something as psychotic as that. But what do you think that done politically, you know what I mean, in Norway at that time, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the movie, so I wouldn't know what narrative is being spun there, but I can, you know, we can assume, you know, it's a classic mentality of a right extremist feeling let down by the system and targeting the people that he feels are the most responsible in an act of absolute cowardice. You know, it's interesting because a book just came out in Norway, detailing the dynamics within the Social Democratic Party in Norway, who were in power then. And the NATO leader, Jens Stoltenberg, was our prime minister at the time. And the issue, or what the book confronts, is the issue of how the remnants of the 22nd of July, because, you know, it was very important for Norway as a country to be in solidarity following it, because it was an attack at our democracy. It was an attack at our rights, and in order for us to recover from that and heal together, we had to stick together.
Right. And
while at the same time, you know, it was an attack on the Social Democratic Party, because the terrorist, felt
he was attacking Norway, wasn't he? That's
it was attacking, of course, attacking Norway, but and then there's the issue. He was attacking the Social Democratic Party for what they stood for, which he felt was what was wrong with the world. He attacked the government building. He went to the island where there was a youth camp for this party, and massacred a lot of future leaders within the party. So it was also an attack at them, while at the same time it was an attack in Norway. And so it was an issue because you had to keep Norway together and intact, while at the same time you had to really confront the issue of right extremism and what forces were in play to let this happen, you know. And so there was a bit debate within the parties, whether, you know, how do we attack these forces in play, because it was important for them to stand together. And then you have the right leaning conservative party who are talking about, you know, we can't have endless immigration, this is bad, we can't, Islam is bad, you know. And so then you're saying, okay, well, how far is it from right conservatism to right extremism? And because you're right conservative, are you legitimizing right extremist views, right?
Okay.
And that's a very hard discussion to have, but it needs to be had. And I think it wasn't confronted as it should have been following the incident. And I think know that a lot of victims and a lot of survivors from the 22nd of July have felt down in that sense. And whenever they've used them, they say, well, it wasn't an attack at our party. They said, well, stop using that card, like the 22nd of July card, like stop using that as a way to enter the conversation. And so, listen, it's a very delicate matter. But I don't think it's been confronted yet in terms of the underlying force, the right conservative forces that have been put in place. And what better example than in America, where, and I don't want, listen, we're just two people discussing politics. I'm not here to say, but this is my observation. This is my observations. I'm saying
absolutely. Go for it.
The Republican Party, in too much of a degree, have invited right extremist views in to contribute to a further backing of the party. But it's gone out of control. It's spun out of control. The problem has now become too big for them. And that's what I'm saying. In the case of Norway, you need to confront those issues and say, listen, here is where we draw the line. None of this can be discussed within politics. We keep ourselves, and Norway is thankfully a very well-governed country. And
absolutely,
it's one of the best countries to live in. But we need to be careful because these forces are coming more into play, and they're more prevalent in Norwegian society than we like to think. And in America, where the acts of conspiracy theories with QAnon, with now the recent incident with Marjorie Greene, who's one of the representatives who they're voting on whether should be thrown out of the committees because of what she said. She said 9/11 is a hoax, all this stuff,
Right.
She's elected for a reason, right? And so you have to be very cautious in terms of how you confront these right-leaning voices. And so it's a tough discussion to have, but that's my overall analysis, because as I said, it can be spun out of control where you see when you see the voices that actually have a bit of a say. As much as we can disagree with them, they're actually having a say in, say, America. And so we'll see, but it needs to be a discussion be had. And now this year marks the 10-year anniversary for the massacre.
Yeah.
And I think we still haven't confronted the issue as to what forces were in play to allow that to happen. Because now, a year ago, right where I lived, there was a young Norwegian boy who killed his adopted sister, who was of Asian descent,
right,
and tried to attack a mosque. Thankfully, he failed so miserably. An absolute pathetic loser who got beat up by a hero of a guy who was 75 years old. But still, it's still happening. He prevented another massacre. So these forces are in play, and they need to be confronted.
It's so interesting, and in terms of what you're saying, and I just want to pick up on one of the points you made, is that when you're going too far left, but you're going too far right, and it's like, I think with everybody, and when you're talking about like solidarity, and in order for solidarity to actually happen, and I remember growing up in the Troubles, and one of the things I distinctly remember my father saying, he's very intelligent, my father, he really looks objectively, but my mum's side of the family, they were in the Orange Order, which is very unionist, very much for the union, like Great Britain and all that. And I think where things are changing now, like the Catholic is the majority, not the unionist anymore. And my father said to me, he said, do you know when things will change? When terrorists are brought into government. And that's kind of what's happened. That's kind of what led to the Good Friday Agreement. And United Ireland, I think, is where we're heading, to be quite honest. That
really,
unionists, but that's going to be the reality. But also the thing that also fueled that, and it's like what you're saying, if we're looking at like history, I always remember in school, and you probably heard this, history always repeats itself, always. It never changes. The narrative never changes. And one of the things that actually happened was when the British Army, when Sunday Bloody Sunday happened, like the song that you two wrote, Sunday Bloody Sunday, and literally that kind of fueled the Troubles. That really gave the IRA a reason to go to war and use Great Britain as a target. They had obviously certain target. They had bombing campaign on the mainland here. So, but if we're kind of looking at that, like you're saying, to bring solidarity into play. So then whenever you see what's happening in Norway, what do you think in terms of, so then of course, then obviously when you go to America and you see the American side of things, and the way that, so obviously with them, obviously we can even go back to like Iraq and Afghanistan and how that actually happened. And we can obviously talk about Trump. Trump kind of alienated the United Nations, and he was having arguments with Germany and feeling like Germany are looking after the Russians. And you've got all of these things which the right don't like, but then the left are very much, you know, I mean, their position, depend on who you speak to, is because there is people that are in the middle. There's people that are not, they don't want to be on either or. And I think that's kind of, you know what I mean? And that's kind of the view I would take, because I lived in Chicago, and so I seen the amount of gun crime, and I saw how democratic states were run. But I also think that part of the American Constitution is that you cannot control the guns. You just can't, because it's so far gone. And Americans are quite clever. But also, if you look at American culture is very, you know, you just look, when we went to a war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I had friends that were military, and they said to me, the way Americans view war is very different to Europeans. That's kind of the way he described it to me. And he went on later to be in special forces, you know? And so, yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like when you kind of, and it's so much that like unpack, like when you look at all of those issues. I mean, what would you say was the difference kind of when you then went to the States and coming from seeing what you'd seen in Norway, and what was kind of your view before you went?
I mean, I think there's an innate romanticization of America because of our exposure to American pop culture, music, sports. And there's so much I love about America. You know, and then obviously when you spend 4 years in a country, you become, you know, it's very easy to romanticize it from the outside, but from the inside, you're exposed to certain ways and dynamics, and the more informed you get, and the more you read about stuff, you understand that, like any other country, it has its, you know, it has its weaknesses. I think one of the things that makes America so great, but perhaps has gone a bit overboard right now, is the case of individual exceptionalism, that the individual stands so the rights of the individual are so strong in America, and it's been a strength of theirs, and it ingrains into their culture. It ingrains in the fact that if you succeed, they say good for you. That's awesome. Good for you, right? And you succeed, and you do whatever, and you do what it takes. And you know what, you know.
Which is
incredible, like an incredible support. Like, you know, I love that. Like when they say, you know, it's just a very, you know, it's a very freeing and very confident culture. And there's so much that can be learned from that from other countries, because it's saying in Norway, it's a bit more, oh, sorry, I'm here. Like, I don't want to, like, you know, I don't want to impose or whatnot. Right. So incredible. And that extends into political rights too. So when we are on the topic of what you can be said and you know, I don't know, extremism, both to the right and left, because right extremism is very easy to define in a sense. Left extremism, on the other hand, is harder to define, because we don't really know what that is yet. Right. In the sense that in terms of political views or actions, but there are. And so when that individual exceptionalism comes into place, you know, I can say whatever I want. I can mean whatever I want. Truth is only relative, right? And that's when we're having a problem, because you're saying, well, that's what I stand for. That my opinion matters as much as the truth, because who I am as an individual, you know, and the individual stands so strong. And I think it's like I said, I think it's gone a bit overboard. There needs to be certain measures in place where you say, no, but this is the truth. Your opinion does not hold as much as the truth right now, right? And or the fact that, you know, I saw a cartoon. It was this conspiracy theories, and said, honey, look at this information I found that none of the doctors and experts of the world know about, right? And so I feel that there needs to be a narrowing down of certain, a narrowing down of truth, because that's the big post-truth error. And listen, like I said in that article as well, that's existed since the hippie era, when there was the counterculture and saying, like, peace, like peace and love and all that, and where they and the acts of truth were being challenged even into the academia. And so, and now it's taken its journey from the left and then gone over to the right. And listen, I'm not laying blame at all on the right. There are issues. I like to say I'm more, I'm more left leaning, but I'd say more so, even so, more so middle, because I see, or at least I have the sense to see that, listen, I know it's not all the right's fault, and I know that there are lackings in the left. And so
absolutely,
that's where I stand. And I think
that's a good place to actually be, man, because I think that when you start to become biased, do you not believe that, kind of like, because obviously you've been in Norway, so you've been in a country where there's been political upheaval there, and where the democracy has been attacked, and to see that is really, really scary. And I don't think anybody wants to see what happened at the Capitol. You can't have that. I'm a firm believer in that. Even if, it's funny, I even spoke to some Donald Trump supporters on a forum, and I said, you can never condone that. I said, we had the troubles in order, but our government was never attacked, not once. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't do that. That is just not acceptable in any walk of life. You can never condone that, never. I understand terrorists when they're doing the thing, you're trying to get them to the table to agree and, to knock it in the head. You know what I mean? But there's also with the EU and the EU kind of EU politics and what have you. And so, but do you think, like, obviously when you look in America, and you think about going there, and I know you kind of experienced it in the article, and obviously if we look at it from like a footballing perspective, so we would come back into the football aspect and that social kind of element, and we talk about, because obviously you've been to a lot of schools, Markus, so it would have opened up your mind. What do you believe breeds kind of hatred in people? In terms, so whenever you look at Black Lives Matter, so you've been in America and you look at that, what do you believe? Where do you believe the racism is coming from? What do you believe outside of the social media platforms? Where do you believe it's coming from? Because I think that's one of the things that nobody really knows. Nobody actually knows where it comes from.
I mean, there are obviously people a lot better qualified to talk about it than me, and I've had a couple of people on the podcast who've been able to explain that to me in a lot better of a perspective and from an own point of experience than I have. And so I could only, say what I know and from my experience with them. But the issue is so deeply ingrained, and there's so many, from slavery and the implications of that, and how there were only just mere moderations to the slavery intact, with with Jim Crow being one of them, and segregation. Right. And so over time that accumulates into a very that racism accumulates into discrimination and to people starting at different points in life. It's like the metaphor in terms of starting a 100-meter race and having them start 50 meters ahead. And so with that in mind, if you have certain, say, for example, property laws in which you say that in terms of, you say that blacks can't own property, then, well, property is an indication of wealth, in the sense that you're owning property, you can sell it. If that goes down in generations, in which whites, for instance, have the overwhelming majority of property and can sell it, and it goes down in generations, of course that will then affect blacks disproportionately. And that's just one of the examples. And I know that there's so many other ways to put it, and I don't want to say much more because of the risk of sounding like ignorant in a sense, or overlooking other important issues. But that's just one of them. And so it's so deeply ingrained in America. And it's almost a bit. I've read books upon slavery in Britain as well. And that is very interesting with Akala, who's an incredible intellectual poet, artist. But obviously, with slavery in America, it's just so deeply ingrained. and it's a matter in which the country's still grappling with. So
absolutely,
that's always the issue. And then on just a further commentary on the political landscape, I think it's important, as much as we disagree, it's important to understand, okay, yeah, Trump is an asshole, he's blah blah blah, but why are they voting for Trump? Why? We can't, we say, okay, sure, say it's wrong, but why? And that's what needs to be analyzed. And I think that sometimes that is taken out of the political discussion. Okay, people feel disenfranchised, people feel neglected. Okay, oh well, they don't have a right to. Okay, fair enough, but let's say, why do they feel like that? And the storming of the Capitol should never ever happen. But why are they feeling like that? And I think that's important to just at least have in mind, rather than saying, oh, they're so wrong, because fact of the matter is, almost half of the population voted for him still, and 7 million more people than last time.
Exactly. So that tells you America's divided right there, regardless of what the result or outcome was. Absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting, because I think with when I do look at that, and I look at like the full picture, and I would say to people, what happens in America does affect us in Europe, because of the economy that America possesses. I know China's doing their thing, and you know what I mean, which is quite interesting. I got a good doc which I'll recommend to you that you should actually watch.
Please do.
Yeah, it's remarkable what China's doing. China's way ahead, like by a country mile. But when I look at kind of like when I lived in Chicago, and I remember being there and seeing being around African Americans, because I'd done a lot of community work on that side. I counseled Black families, people involved in gang violence. It was something I did voluntary, like outside of when I worked at Nike, and I was obviously worked at a club, and one of the things that I definitely noticed, and I saw families that were destroyed. They were just destroyed. I remember going in this one home. It was a Latino family, and the mom had 6 sons, and 4 of them were murdered. The gang violence, and I think that it's very hard to comprehend when you're in that situation, if you're that mom, and what you've experienced, and racially what she's experienced. So there's a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people have to, you know what I mean, to I suppose to be there. And I think Donald Trump, he came in from the perspective of to run these cities in a safe manner, to make sure they stay safe, to make sure gun laws don't get out of control, the guns don't get into the wrong hands, things like that. But I would agree with you. I definitely think America has, but I also think it's the cultural side of it, from being in that environment. But also, if you look at like the wealth gaps, like what you were talking about, I don't think that's helping either. A lot of these tax havens that are happening, I think there has to be a kind of, because you think about the middle class, even 20, 30 years ago, was in a very different space. So I think from that perspective, and kind of working for an organization like Nike are people said to me, they're Nike or left wing. They're not. They're very much in the center in a lot of ways. The way Phil Knightley has kind of went about doing it, and the way Nike's run. I definitely can tell you, from being in that organization in a marketing capacity, I can definitely tell you that where they're going, but also they do have alliances in China as well, which a lot of people have to be aware of. But at the same time, I also think that, you know what I mean, in terms of the classes being and money being disproportionately, and that's where I believe I'm in the middle and I'm not on the right, because I do believe in capitalism, but I also believe you have to look after society. I don't believe you can just have people who make all this money and then the poor nothing is passed back down, because then you have a lack of balance. And then, of course, tyranny will exist, and that's no good, either.
I think with everything else, I think you need nuance. You don't need too much from one side or the other. It needs to be somewhere.
Absolutely, it's got to be in the middle.
And then people would say, well, you're not standing for anything, or you're not instigating change enough. And I have this discussion with my roommate plenty of times. They say, yeah, well, we need to push the agenda that way in order to create meaningful change. I say, yeah, but like, and it's a difference in mindset. But I said, yeah, well, you need to make incremental changes, and you can't have extreme upheaval in a short amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. And so, listen, that's politics. Everyone has an opinion about it, and
absolutely. So Marcus, so we kind of look at the football aspect. So when you're kind of obviously you end up being, in terms of being drafted. So take us kind of through that journey, and then kind of up until so obviously we look at you, and then obviously you come across to Scotland, right? Obviously you go to New Zealand, then you come to Scotland, and so in terms of the article, I know it obviously came out in the tabloids, and obviously you speak about it. What kind of do you feel is being infringed upon in the football aspect, and why do you think football is afraid, or I suppose built with fear, to actually get out there and actually we're gonna talk about these political issues? It's not just Black Lives Matter. It's not just one thing. It's many things, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I understand that clubs and the players that are an extension of the clubs, they're representatives, right? And football is a global sport, and the risk of alienating people because you are a certain political orientation, and the club is almost there as this kind of socio cultural or socioeconomic institution, right? And has an extreme community value, right? And so I understand like being of too much of a political inclination will alienate certain people. And so I understand that there needs to be a certain conservatism in place. And so I think, and politics is such a heated topic for many. So I understand, I can understand that clubs don't want to engage in that all too much. At the same time, I think it would be foolish not for players to use their platforms for social good, like a case of Marcus Rashford, like a case of Raheem Sterling, for matters that seem very commonsensical and that seem to be lacking in terms of, I'm Norwegian, so I'm seeing this from the outside, but in terms of the issue with Rashford and Lunchman, and you're thinking, yeah, but that's incredible. You're using your platform for social good. You are a role model for millions of people. You play for one of the most global clubs in the world. Of course, you should use your platform for social good, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Right. I think that the greatest irony is people say stick to football, and then you have Twitter filled with people who have an opinion about something that hasn't to do with anything about their job. So that's the greatest paradox of them all. And then I also see, in terms of pure virtue signaling, I endorse the message which Black Lives Matter stands for, and as should the Premier League, as they do, right? And so you have them taking a knee. You have the Black Lives Matter logo before the games. My problem is it's just words, or let me be careful. I'm sure there's been a lot being done. Yeah. I'm sure there's been a lot being done, but the Premier League is selective in the sense that, okay, well, we're going to choose to endorse this, but at the same time, you're also part of a cabal here in which awarded Qatar the World Cup in 2022. And then you can argue, oh, was that right? Because the workers' rights there are deplorable, right? And so so that as soon as they do that, it's right for them to endorse it, and I fully endorse it. But then at the same time, you become then subject of scrutiny, because then you're like, well, what about this? And what about that? And I understand that acknowledgement. Like I spoke publicly about Mesut Özil, and then you can say, well, his best man at his wedding was Erdogan, the Turkish president, who's not exactly known to be the greatest.
They don't like
human
the
rights
West
protector. Yeah, exactly.
They don't like us so much. Yeah.
No, but at the same time, Mesut Özil spoke publicly about the Uyghur Muslims in China who are victims of genocide, basically, and Arsenal distanced themselves from it. So then I'm just curious as to the process of selection here, because that to me seems like a very commonsensical thing. But then you say, well, the commercial interest in China, that's a big factor, right? And so these institutions that endorse it then become a victim of their own moral stance, right? Because I think that's an important issue, but I know that people have very highly vested interests in China, commercially speaking. So listen, it's so convoluted and troublesome, and so so it needs to be done right. And so I understand why then clubs and players might hold back a bit, because it is such an intensely heated topic in which people will attack you no matter what you do too.
And I think it's interesting when you're kind of talking about in terms of where it's going, and I think issues of race, but I also think tackling poverty, tackling all of these things, and I just always remember I remember like my grandmother saying to me, she says, poverty will always exist. It's not something you're going to erase. And I think a lot of the things, I think even with like race, I think is definitely I mean, like for example, my grandmother, she didn't agree when my mum married a Catholic. My dad was a Catholic, you know what I mean? But also part of my mum's family are Jewish, so there was I was kind of a mongrel in the middle of that. So it was very like I'm a big believer, and I spoke to somebody recently. He's a good friend of mine. He's an Indian friend of mine. I said, well, you know, members of my family ended up and they were murdered by Hitler. So,
Right.
you know what I mean? And he asked me, he said, you know, do I forgive Hitler? And I said, of course you have to, because, you know, resentment is like toilet. It's like, you know, it's like poison that you continue to drink. It only hurts you in the end, doesn't hurt anybody else. So my attitude is, you know what I mean, in terms of what's actually happened, you know what I mean? In terms of to Jews and, you know, even though I'm not Jewish, but I respect that side of my family. But I also, growing up in the Troubles, it ruined my football career in a lot of ways. So the political landscape wreaked havoc from that perspective. But I understand it was the times. That's what I recognize. And
sometimes it's easier to not engage in it. I get that. You like saying it affecting your career.
Yeah, there was other victims. I mean, I had a friend. He walked in. He was killed in the Shankill bombing in 1991. He got blown to bits when he walked into that shop. So, but I recognize it was the times. And I think that when people look at the political landscape, and I think as well with Black Lives Matter and even these other far right wing people, they need to make sure they look at and they be objective. I think that's what I would say, is be objective at all times, because you know there's other things, and I think throughout history, you know, you look at the Romans, you look at all of those things, but in football, if you say this to football clubs, they don't like it. You know what I mean?
No.
There's a certain disdain and contempt that they'll utilize. You know what I mean? Against you if they think you're too political or things like that. So
yeah, it's easier not to. You know, it's easier not to.
Yeah, and that's where the fear is. So see, for you, Markus, let's kind of look at your perspective. So you kind of come out, and you obviously spoke to the paper and the tabloids. And what was it that you kind of felt being a player, and what is, when you look at football and how that it is political across a lot of kind of remits, whether it be income level, whether it be race, color, creed, all of those things. What's kind of your perspective in 2021 and what you've learned in like the last, say, I would say 1 to 2 years? What kind of has been like your perspective
on what the recent
so kind of all of these things that you've spoke, having been in America and now coming to a place like because Scotland's funny, you know. It's an interesting place up there. Scotland is, because it's you know, the SNP, Scotland wanted independence and all that stuff. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because how do you kind of think about, based upon before you were playing in Scotland before? Would you say your political understanding, and that you want to be able to be free to actually discuss it, and you feel maybe, you know what I mean, that you're not, you're made to feel uncomfortable because you're a footballer, and because you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, first of all, I think it's important that we have discussions like this where you can foster discussion, and I'll try to aim to do that with my podcast as well. And frankly, I'd love to hear someone who has rather different views than me and to discuss that. I think it's important to not agree, but to understand. Where they're coming from. And so for me, it's just been, you know, I live with a guy who wants Scottish independence and who's working within that space to get that going. And he's a fervent supporter of it. And I asked him why, and he says, well, we need this and need that. And then I challenge him a bit. Then he says that, and he wants to get into politics. So I'm exposed through that. You know, he's an avid reader of both the Spectator and what's the other one? the more spectators, more right-leaning one, and the left one, the statesman. And so, he I think he does great at that because he's reading both sides of it and trying to navigate a discussion and trying to see how it is. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, that you have to, I understand that people are of a certain inclination and they have certain opinions and they're principled, and that's great. But there needs to be, in order to instigate change, there needs to be dialogue. And dialogue can't happen if people are just shouting at each side of the room and not actually hearing the other person. And so for me, that's been, that's just been reinstated by life in general. And that can be applied to all aspects of life, whether we agreed on something that didn't have to do with politics at all. And so for me, that's been the greatest, that's a continual journey at that. And so, and I haven't felt at all, I'm not that high profile of a footballer for me to feel like I'm at the wrong end of someone's opinion. And so why not have the discussions? And then you can always say that you're there for the sake of dialogue. That's all I want. And I'm not going to say you're wrong to believe that. That's like saying with religion, you shouldn't believe that. No, but let's have a discussion about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of because I know in terms of kind of when you're kind of looking at like the full picture, and I think the political arena, especially for footballers, sometimes can be a difficult thing. And it can be a difficult thing from the perspective of, I suppose, and like you're saying, the brands or the club is, there's certain things they're willing to do, but then there's other things, and they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't, kind of thing. So when you kind of look at it, when that article went out, what was kind of the club's position? What would you say their position was, and things like that? You felt like you definitely could express free speech, from that perspective. Okay.
And like I said, I'm not even a pawn in the whole game. Like I'm not even on the board, chess board. So it's I understand that there's a case for when higher profile players do it, but I think it's great that you have a club like I don't know the process or the conversation between Manchester United and Markus Rashford, but I think it's incredible. And you see when someone does when someone like Markus Rashford does that, he becomes an even greater role model. I think it's incredible for kids to look at this guy and say, like, listen, because you have the stereotypical, footballers are stupid, they can only kick a ball, blah blah. This guy's redefining, he's part of redefining what a footballer should be like. And I think that's incredible. And footballers
I think that is good, actually, the political aspect, 100%. Yeah.
But in this case with Rashford, doesn't he even need to have to be political in the sense that he just wants free food for like children. You can say, okay, well, you need state subsidies, blah, blah, blah. But like opening up at least for it, and not putting a lock on it, saying, no, you can't comment on anything. I think that's wrong. And then you can say, well, this guy shouldn't, if there's limits to what a person can say, like we said from earlier, in terms of narrowing to feel as to what a person can say, in the sense that you can't letting, people saying 9/11 is a hoax, for example, into the political fora. But having role models like that and redefining what it is and looking up and say, wow, look at Markus Rashford, who's a really brilliant footballer, but he's using his platform to help kids as well. For instance, he's the best example of it. I think he's a great role model for kids, and I think and for myself as well. I think it's inspirational to see, and so it becomes a case like LeBron James, who's able to use his platform to build a school. That's how can you be against that, in a sense? And then yes, political opinions will come into the matter, but it's with his case, it's usually been about about BlackLivesMatter and stuff like that, and I don't see any problem with that.
I think there's a lot of players now, and because I think millennials are more politically in tune.
Mm-hmm.
That's my personal. And I think some people actually asked me, said, "Why do you think most millennials are very left leaning?" I said, because they're very sensitive and they have a lot more empathy than previous generations did. Gen Z, Gen X, you know, and baby boomers, you know, like your dad's generation, because your dad's a lot older than me and you. So you know what I mean? We're kind of in that generation where we're a little bit more aware. We have a little bit more empathy at times, you know what I mean? I know.
So there's at least maybe a heightened sensitivity to issues, and that's part of having discussions, because listen, you're not aware of it. Like I said, when I came to America, I wasn't aware of these issues until I was exposed to it. So maybe a heightened sensitivity, maybe emotionally we're a bit more sensitive. Maybe that's to do with our upbringing is more sensitive at that. But that's a whole psychological analysis. But yeah, it's true. Millennials are more left leaning, and it's interesting as to figuring out why.
Yeah, and I think what I would say, I think the generation in America, in fact, I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and in America, a large percentage of the Europeans that emigrated there, you know, in the 1920s, 1930s, a lot of those people, so the white generation is actually decreasing in America. The stats prove that. You're going to have a lot more African Americans, Latinos there. That number is going to skyrocket in the next 10 to 20 years, where white people will be the minority, not the majority. And so, but if you told a white American that, they'll bite your head off, because they'll be like, "How dare you say that?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it's reality, and I always say to the people that work for me, I say, guys, the truth is in the numbers. You know what I mean? So don't ever believe the truth isn't. So, and I think it's very interesting, and kind of hearing from like your perspective, kind of going through it and seeing the political landscape and where it's actually going. You know what I mean? Especially in football, and the fact that players can be role models. But I believe even a player like looking at Akin Finwa, he's playing in League Two, and I think he's just made that next step up with Wickham to the Championship. He's trying to, and he uses his platform just like Marcus Rashford. You know what I mean? And I think he's trying to impact change, and I think he's a really nice guy. I think he's a great role model. I think we're looking at role models, and I think that it would definitely be good. And so if you're looking at things and using kind of your platform, so kind of BroPod. We'll just talk about that. It's obviously the podcast that you run with one of your friends from college in the States. Give us the motivation for that, Marcus. What's kind of the reason behind that?
Except for having a large chunk of your day to fill and pretending to be somewhat productive and justifying your Duke degree in a sense. It's a way for us to fill our curiosity. Talking about role models, you know, I talk about my parents, and my dad doesn't have anything beyond a high school education, but he's very socially and emotionally intelligent, and knows. I've learned a lot from him, and I've seen the value in terms of just being a bit unafraid in reaching out to people. First of all, it's a great opportunity for me to link up with people that I find really interesting, and it provides me a platform to talk to these people and say, hey, listen, I think what you are doing is really cool, and what better way to learn than to have an hour or 45 minute chat with them, and for us to just listen and ask questions that we are genuinely interested in. And upon doing the interview, we've done our research, and so you put your research into it. And then you have the interview, which just either reaffirms or debunks certain things you think, and you add that to your portfolio of knowledge. And so, if you expose yourself to these different people and to topics that you're interested in, I think it only serves you well. You can think of it as a means to an end, in the sense that, okay, I'm going to use this portfolio of knowledge to in my endeavors somewhat. Okay, so I have the dots there. Let's hope that they can connect somehow when I go into doing whatever I make. Just like for yourself, in terms of, okay, these are my experiences, these are my political experiences, these are my football experience, these are the people I met. Okay, now I'm running this academy, or now I'm doing this, right? And that has only has served you well. That's the thinking of it. And then you can think of it as just an end in itself, that we're having conversations with cool people who are doing cool things. And I think that also is it's for me, that's of great enjoyment. I'm learning from it, but I'm enjoying it too. Saying, hey, listen, you wanna link up and let's have a chat. And most, and like almost everyone I reach to are very positive when I reach out to them, because people, I think, appreciate when you reach out and want to have a conversation, and they appreciate someone that wants to listen, and that's what we provide in a sense. And so, it's twofold in that sense. But for me, it's just been a great platform to learn from people. And now, having talked to now 21 guests, I have a great network of people that I've reached out to. And I think that's important as well when I am in my football career, to prepare for a career after, just being able to learn from people and in connecting.
And what's so just to kind of hit on that, Markus, what kind of football wise? So what is it you want to? What kind of career are you looking to do? Kind of post football? Is it kind of in the media? Is it what can you see?
Yeah, I'm trying to expose myself to that, and I'm trying to figure out slowly but surely. Before, when I was younger, I thought, oh, well, I need to grow up. I need to find a job, right? And for some reason, I was like, oh, I can't have anything to do with football. But then I was like, wait a minute, why not? Like, that's my life.
Right.
I want to work with what I love. At the same time, I can't see myself being a coach or a academy director, or I'm not also interested in maybe do my badge and stuff like that. But I'm interested in doing the business aspect of it. I have my master's in business too, so I have some pedigree within it. And so the intersection of business and football is a business, so it's maybe not an intersection at that. But football is becoming an increasing business. There's more and more money being put into it. It's a very exciting place to navigate, right? And there's so many things to do. And then I can say, well, work within football. What does that mean? You're doing one aspect of football and stuff like that. But I would love to work within the business side of people, whether that's being, we've had the last couple of guests we've had. Yesterday, I put out a podcast that was about American ownership in European football, with an increasing amount of sophisticated American investors investing in European football. Why? Why is that happening? What can an American style management offer? That's very interesting to take part in that, because there's no doubt an American style of management brings something Europeans can, and vice versa. Before that, we had Christian Ari, who built the Bayern brand in America. That's very interesting. And he said that they had to take a cultural anthropological standpoint in trying to build up a fan base. And my major was my bachelor's degree was cultural anthropology. So I was like, okay, I really appreciate you giving me a shout out there unknowingly. And so that can also be integrated. So I think working within that space would be very interesting. And I think football is such a, and then you have that every weekend to look forward to too, which I'm sure, in terms of playing and taking part of, is something we all love.
And so in terms of like the playing aspect and kind of increasing those guests, so I mean it's quite interesting. I think I saw that actually up on LinkedIn, and Jordan Gardner, I think his name is, and I remember, I mean, I did disagree with him on certain things that he was kind of speaking about, but it was more because I think there's other sides to the game that I think maybe Americans are really lacking. And I know kind of behind the scenes, and I was saying to him, it's nothing's ever black and white. It just isn't. And I think what the Glazers have done with Manchester United, and people I've spoken to behind the scenes and things they've told me, tell me that, you know what I mean? And the way they've appointed leaders, I think, has been very poorly done. I think Ed Woodward's out of his depth, because I've spoken to one of the lawyers that I know, that he was part of the takeover. He told me where it's going pear-shaped and why it's going to continue to go in a bad direction. And so when I speak to United supporters, I can speak objectively. So I'm speaking.
No, but listen, that's totally fair enough argument too. Because
I think the Henrys, I think the Henrys are very good owners. I think they really know what they want. I think, you know what I mean? I like the value proposition they've got. I think they understand the market, but you know what I mean? I think they're, and that's why I said to Jordan, I said, they're the people that I think are really setting the tone. because they understand they're very much there. They're very much involved. I don't know. I just like their style of leadership. And also, I've said to him, I said, listen, my grandfather was a majority shareholder at Glasgow Celtic, so for over 25 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm speaking from experience, and also Dundalk, one of the clubs I think he's involved with. I also, one of my accountant's father was the ex-chairman there. So I know Dundalk very, very well. I just said to him, I've said to him, Dundalk were more successful before Peak Six got there, because they got to the Champions League, they got to the preliminary
Europa
round,
League, yeah,
and they lost the Legia Warsaw. So, and also at the time, one of my friends, he was the technical director there. At the time, Legia Warsaw. So, and he said to me how impressed he was, and he actually said to me, he actually sent me a message saying, Nick, I don't think they needed investors. You know what I mean? He said,
right,
because they were making good money, but maybe they needed it more from the commercial, which I can understand. I understand that's a big part of football, but I think that because I like if I don't agree with something, I'm not just going to be a yes man.
as should be.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. But I think he's good. Some of the things he talks about, but then I said to him, tax, and when you sell a player, there is tax on that. You know what I mean? It's not like you make this money and it's all yours and it goes into the bank.
No. There's so many things to explore from it, and
Yeah.
Listen, I totally agree, and I think I did ask him, should we be skeptical, because
Right.
you'll see an increasing amount of investor money being challenging FIFA and UEFA, and the matter is, how long could they withstand that? How long could they withstand that pressure? And it is a problem. Increased amount of fans feeling like they're being alienated, and commercial revenues taking a priority. And so that is an issue. And will clubs, I say, will you have a European Super League? What will happen? And of course, there are. North American sports are very it's a culture for bringing an immense entertainment value. I remember going to a baseball game in Kansas, and it wasn't really about the baseball game. It was about the experience. It was everything that came around it. While football in Europe is a lot more, it's about the game and nothing else. And so it's a different cultural approach towards the game as well. And I think, listen, you can't have an entire Americanization of European football either. I don't think that's a good idea for one bit. But certain best practices can be brought in place.
I think
certain best practices can be put in place.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, man. One of the things that I said to Jordan, I said, the Glazers were at the Super Bowl win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they beat the Chiefs there on Sunday, and I said that, but they don't take an interest. So when United supporters see that, that's going to really make them upset, because they're going to feel like, you know what I mean, this guy's over here, but they have no interest. And so that, I think, has to be addressed, and they need to come out, because I think if they approach United supporters and had a very different view, but I do believe Americans, and that's one of the things I learned from my friends, and he was telling me, when Americans go to war, they view war as money. They view, I'm going to go in and win. And okay, I understand wars are a battleground, but war, I would say to people, wars are like divorces. Nobody ends up winning. No one. Do you know what I mean? Somebody always ends up. And I mean, I remember there's a guy, he did this speech in Iraq, Colonel Tim Collins, and he said, we're going into Iraq to liberate, not to conquer. But I felt the Americans had a very different perspective on that. I believe the reasons why we went to war. I think the British, we had a more kind of, objective view, and we didn't want people to die and things like that, but that's kind of not how wars happen. People always die. That's kind of the reality. Yeah. But I think Americans, when they come into war or business, it seems like it's more, you know what I mean? It's more about the winning aspect. There's a winning mentality, but I don't think you can place winning in other areas where you're dealing with human beings and you're dealing with people. No. And I think maybe when they're coming into Europe, I think they have to be careful, because it's not just about the money. And I think that's what concerns fans. And I think Europeans, if there's a club, and I'm trying to take over a non-league club at the minute, Marcus, and let me tell you something. If I go in there with a view to, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to get rid of this person, and just so I can make if I can turn into a 20, 30 million pound club, even to get up to like National League level. But I can't be like that because people will view me very differently. If I kind of go in with that kind of attitude, because I have to think about the fans, and this is a club that's been badly run for a long time, for probably almost 35, 40 years. So you're trying to turn that around. You're trying to turn the fortunes because it's been a bit of a poison chalice. So, but my attitude is get the basics right, make sure the people aren't left behind, make sure I don't destroy their identity, that I make sure the fans feel really involved in that kind of journey that we're going to take it on, and things like that. Even some of the coaches I'm bringing in, I think, are quite political figures. So I think talking about football, it's a big understanding. I think that Americans need to have, and what have you. But I understand why they want to do it, because to them it's a business opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a business opportunity, and then Jordan, I think, is an example of like he was on the ground in Denmark for 6 months. There needs to, and he says that, listen, there are North American owners that come in and they think they can just buy a club. And in the case of, I think, was an example of Americans buying Fiorentina within 2 weeks and not having done their due diligence and finding out there was actually an agency that ran the sale of the players, and it was just an absolute shambles, right? Wow. And so that's important to take into consideration. Is also the fact that a lot of these clubs are financially unstable. Americans say, okay, well, we can bring in these best practices here, because in terms of managing a club, we can be pretty good at that. And then acknowledging, football as a intrinsic cultural value within a community. We need to foster that as well. Listen, again, nothing's black and white. There needs to be nuance, right?
But he seems like he's trying to change which is good, you know what I mean? And I think it's like you say, and I always say to him, I mean, just because I always see his posts and I always like them. If I like it, I like it. If I don't like it, I comment. That's typically my two ways of communicating when I see his posts up there. But no, man, I mean, I think in terms of so kind of going forward. So obviously, I know you do a lot of stuff with your dad. That's one of the things that they kind of. So obviously, he does a lot of stuff on ESPN and what have you. What's kind of your? Would you like to do media on that level, or do you want to stay more from a podcasting, because obviously podcasting is replacing radio, I suppose, let's face it,
Right.
Radio. I mean,
I mean, my podcast ambitions are like, it sounds maybe a bit, I'll probably have this podcast going for a lot of my life, and I'll follow up on what I said, because for me to connect with people I find interesting, and it's a great platform for me to pursue that. So I'll probably always have that. If it were to be a popular one, so be it. If not, then it's just for my enjoyment, and if people can share in my enjoyment, and that's what I want to do. And so for me, I think the most important thing is that, that I'm not standing still, that I'm always on the move, that I'm always doing something, that I'm always, ultimately, if you want to get something done, you have to do it yourself. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do. I'm still, I'm playing football, but I'm also trying to, I'm doing this and seeing where this can lead to. And then ultimately you'll have to confront that more so when you stop playing. And so we'll see. But, something my dad does, I think is really cool. And I stand to learn a lot from it. It can inspire me. And then we'll see what follows. But staying within the game, I think, I love football, as do you. You stayed in it for a reason, and that's what I hope would do at some point too. And we'll see when that is, when I eventually retire, which I don't know yet, really.
Yeah, and what so in terms of how do you feel it's going from? So in terms of your next steps, so you're really enjoying Green Knockmorton, you're really enjoying that training with that club and being with that club as a player.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was a great club to come to. Sadly, the manager resigned in December, who I had a really good relationship with, but a great team, and a great group of people. And I think, you shouldn't take it for granted being in a football environment and connecting with people, because it is people have livelihoods to look out for. But I'm fortunate enough to be in a very good change room. 3 months left of the season, and so we'll see. The pandemic has almost accelerated the turnover rate in football as well. People aren't signing very long-term contracts, at least at the level that I'm at. So it'll be exciting to see the summer to come and see what really happens. And because my priority right now is just to play 3 months, and it's always benefited me looking short term and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to play this season. I'm going to do well here, and then we'll see what follows.
And then the SPL. So would you like to, after the season, would you like to be up around obviously the SPL, maybe going back there if your contract ends here, and then kind of getting up there? Because I know the SPL is a good breeding ground. I know quite a few players that kind of were in the championship in Scotland, so it's a good platform, for players who want to kick on.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think any player has an ambition to always progress, of course, and that's for me been always the biggest motivation is to constantly improve. And when I look back and I'm retired, I look back and I say, this is how far you got, this is how far much you got out of your abilities. And so for any player, it would be unnatural to say you don't want to progress, but where that is, impossible for me to say right now.
So you really you're enjoying, as long as you're enjoying the football, man. That's what's part of it, and like I say, and you feel at the end of the day, you feel like, I suppose, not having regrets. I think that's the most important thing, isn't it, Marcus? Really, and
absolutely.
And as long as you can say you've used the best of your ability, although I didn't get too far at the end of the 20s, so I'll always have regret.
No. But listen, certain things will be in the way. But like you use your platform, and you're going into avenues now within football that are fantastic by the sound of it. So some one door closes, one other opens is the good old cliche. But it's a matter of how you respond and to use those references and experiences, and you're an example of that. So, like, listen, that's part of life, and I will have to, confront that when that time comes too. But for now, I'm in that fortunate position where I can, it's down to me and how I perform. Football has ups and downs, but of course.
And I know it'll definitely be great. I know we're probably gonna do some more stuff here down the road, Marcus, and I think that a lot of your knowledge, I think a lot of stuff you've spoken about today, I appreciate you being very honest, and being where you can feel, because I think that somebody being able to have free speech, I think that's very, very important for us. And the fact that, you know what I mean, we don't, as Stephen Covey says, you don't listen to reply, you listen to, most people listen to reply, they don't listen to understand. And I think that's so true, in a respectful manner, even if you don't agree. But I think I always like to hear both sides. Both sides. I actually believe there's three. There's the left, there's the right, and then there's the middle. So I'm always listening to all three. And I think it's a great place to be. And I think that football should be a place where, if you're involved in political causes that are impacting change, that are pioneering lives and changing lives, I believe that's what politics should be about. When you are political, that's what it shouldn't just be I have an opinion, but we've got to act upon it and do something about it. And I think it's great the way you're kind of putting that out there, and you're not afraid to, you know what I mean? And the fact that you, obviously the media report on it, I think that's good. And hopefully that'll help a lot of your teammates. So if they listen to this, they can, if they have views, they shouldn't be afraid, or if they have a vision, something they want to achieve. Not to, just off the pitch as well, and using that time as a footballer, because like you're saying, footballers do have platforms, and guys like Marcus Rashford have not been afraid. They've saw something, saw a need, they went and met the need, and I think that's where people are judged. I really do.
No, exactly. I think that's I agree with all you said there, and I think it's a great summary of what we were trying to do as well. In terms of fostering discussion and not deeming things black and white, because they very much aren't.
Absolutely, yeah. We're living in a crazy world with the pandemic and all that stuff, so it's trying to get over that as well. You know what I mean? So I know members of my family, they've had their first vaccine. So
oh, really? Good for them.
Yeah, very few people have, but I know me and you, like, we're probably going to be the last on the list due to our age. But elderly people will be getting it, and our parents and people like that will be getting it before us. So
right, that's how it is, isn't it?
Once we're all done, and people can then go off on holidays and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely
exactly.
Hopefully, it's going to be good. But no, Marcus, I really appreciate you coming on to Continental Soccer TV and really talking about your journey, and also Marcus, where do people find you if they want to kind of come and ask you some questions? about, and also to come to the BroPod. Where can they find you?
Well, they can find BroPod on at Twitter at BroPod1. That was the BroPod was taken, so a very creative solution. I just put a 1 after it. So BroPod1 and BroPod on Facebook, and then you can find me at Markus Fjørtoft, FJORTOFT on Twitter mainly, and that in LinkedIn. That's some good places to connect with me. So for anyone who listens, then if they want to listen, don't hesitate.
No, absolutely, man, because I'm sure you've had some great conversations. So what I'd say is I'll get them to so you'll be able to send us through all of that, and then we'll pretty much add it. And like I say, everyone, we appreciate you coming to listen to an episode, and anything for Continental Spire Soccer TV content-wise, you can actually go down, obviously go to Notification Squad on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. You should be able to find us. And like I say, we'll look forward to seeing you on another episode. We'll come down as far as Soccer TV.